Alright guys, welcome back for another video on HAIKYU Fly High, and today I'm going to do a review of the kit for the UR version of Kagayama, and I'll also talk at the end of the video whether or not I think you should be summoning for him. Now, Kagayama alongside with SP Nishinoya is actually one of the two characters that did get buff on the JP side. However, unlike SP Nishinoya, who basically like the whole kit got completely reworked for UR version of Kagayama, even though we don't know which version we'll be getting, the difference it doesn't actually make too much difference at all. Because a lot of the buff that he got is just a higher number, to be honest. Okay. So there wasn't any like new effect or new skills. It was just gonna be a higher number, slightly higher than what he had previously. Okay, so regardless whether we got the pre-buff version or the post-buff version, it's not really gonna change my review on how good he is, or in terms of how you actually want to play him, or whether or not you should summon for him, etc. Okay, now let's just go through the skills one by one. So his skill 1, this is just a setting skill. You are, however, able to increase the quick attack of the attacking player. So you can already see here, Kagayama is going to be suited for a quick spiking team. He doesn't really give us much buff. He obviously still can provide some buff to power spikers. However, he's obviously able to provide a bit more for the quick spikers. Second skill, this is a surfing skill, but it does have a bit of a buffing ability in the sense that if the surf is such a critical surf, you are also able to increase the attack technique for your teammates by 10%, which is actually really, really nice. Like anything which includes like attack technique or defense technique, it's always going to be a quite good buff in my opinion, because it's quite hard to get those type of multipliers. Now, this does have the condition of being a critical serve. However, it's not actually that hard for Kagayama, because Kagayama does have ways of actually increasing awareness for both himself and also for his teammates. So I'll talk about that in a bit, but this is actually quite easy to trigger, okay? Now, skill 4, this is actually going to be a setter dump. Now, setter dumps in general are going to be weaker than spikes. However, this setter dump is actually quite strong in terms of numbers. Also, Kagayama's UR memory is also setter dump related, so you can potentially also argue for that perspective. I personally still prefer like a traditional spike rather than a setter dump, but that's just my personal preference. This does also have a utility in the sense that for any opposing or enemy who have a blocking skill in cooldown, you will be able to increase that cooldown by an extra Fortnite credit. Now, this is not actually that. I mean, it's very nice on paper, etc. And in practice, I still think it's nice. But one thing you do have to bear in mind is that in future, a lot of the SP quick spikers, so we're talking about the likes of SP Hinata or SP Suki, etc. They all have ways of actually having unblockable spikes. A lot of the quick spikes are actually unblockable in this game. So as a result, it doesn't really matter whether or not the enemy have blocking skills in cooldown or an extra cooldown, because it can't be blocked in the first place anyway, right? And because Kageyama is normally used in quick specialty teams, that's kind of why, even though this is very, very good on paper, in practice, I don't think it's going to make like a massive impact in terms of gameplay, because a lot of your quick spikes are unblockable already. Okay, so that's basically his setting skill, serving skill, and also his setup. Now, his main core game mechanics all come from his skill 3, okay? And this is basically his passive. So first of all, he's able to increase his own attack technique, which is always nice. But then furthermore, basically whenever an opponent serve, setup or spike is a critical hit, you're able to get 1 stack of his own buff. And then also whenever your own teammate perform a serve, setup or spike, you're able to consume that buff in order to give extra awareness to that person, and also extra strength bars as well. And also at the start of every single rally, you are able to get 1 competitive spirit. Now, this is always going to be very, very nice. However, one thing you have to bear in mind is that at the start of rally, you only get 1 of them. And basically, if you're actually surfing, that basically means that buff will be used up by the surf straight away, okay? So if you actually want this buff going into your spike, which a lot of time is probably the most important one that you want the buff to go into, you are kind of relying on the enemy to actually do a critical serve, set it up for a spike, okay? Now, the meta is definitely shifting towards a situation where vast majority of the characters in this game are trying to go for crit builds, so I still do think this is quite easy to trigger, but this is just something you guys do have to bear in mind. For example, if your enemy is not actually trying to do an awareness build, and also you have to remember, it's only going to be for critical serve, set it up for spike. Okay, so basically only things that will be impacted by awareness. If the enemy just have very high critical receive, so basically their high reflex, it's not actually able to grant you any of those buff stacks to Kagayama himself, okay? So that's something you have to bear in mind. And also, obviously, needless to say, in Narizaki team, it's going to be a hard counter for your version of Kagayama because in Narizaki team, it's all about non-critting, okay? So those are just kind of the minor detail you have to bear in mind for Kagayama UR. Now, this is going to be slightly helped if you do actually have Kagayama duped, because when you actually have Kagayama as skill resistance 2, what's going to happen is that if you do actually have Kagayama himself is actually consuming that stack of his own buff, he will get that stack back at the end of the action, okay? So for example, if you use Kagayama to do a set, sorry, not to do a set, if you use Kagayama to start off serving, he won't actually be consuming that stack, and therefore your buff stack can then go into your spiking stack. Or likewise, if you actually want to reserve a bit more stack for the future turns, you can use Kagayama to do a set dump. Like I said, his set dump is still pretty decent and does have that utility effect, so you can use it every now and then for sure. And then once again, you're able to conserve your buff stack for a different action later on, okay? So those are going to be ways that your skill resistance 2 is able to help. Furthermore, I do actually think skill resonance 2 is pretty important resonance for Kagayama because you're also able to further increase the awareness for your teammate and also for himself, okay? So if I just take the smallest number here from his skill 3, this is only going to be a 20% increase to awareness, which is nice, but it's not going to make a character all of a sudden able to crit every single time, right? However, if you're actually able to have this as skill resonance 2, you're able to increase that by a further 15, okay? 35% that is going to be a lot more obvious. And furthermore, if it's Kagayama himself, you'll be able to increase that by additional 20% as well, okay? So Kagayama can literally get 55% increase in awareness, and that's kind of what I say. His skill 2, getting this critical serve, is actually going to be really, really easy, assuming you also build his potential with high awareness, okay? Now, his skill 2 also have other effect, like just look at how much text there is in the skill resonance 2, and you already know this is going to be a quite important resonance for Kagayama, okay? You're also able to increase his own strength, which is nice. When Kagayama do something which consumes that stat, you're also able to increase that power, whether it's surf or set dump, etc., by an additional 15, which is also nice. Furthermore, if you actually have 3 or more of the stats on, the attack technique of the person doing that action will be increased by 10 or 18% after the buff as well, okay? So basically, he's able to provide a lot more buff. And then for skill resonance 4, you're able to increase his own set. You're also able to increase huge amount of strength to your allies, who will be doing the quick spike or set dump, up to 90% of the buff, so there's a huge amount of buff, okay? And furthermore, when Kagayama actually activates skill, you are able to reduce the cooldown of his other skills, and if you remember, once again, he can already use his set dump every now and then for utility purpose. His surf is not bad either, and obviously he does have that natural setting as well, so he can actually rotate his own skills quite quickly because of skill resonance 4 as well, okay? Now, overall, I don't think skill resonance 4 is like absolutely necessary. It's going to be a massive buff, okay? 90% increase in buff, it's going to be massive, okay? And also higher skill rotation. Those are all really, really good. But for me, I would say probably the minimum you want to get to is going to be skill resonance 2 if you want that consistency. Obviously, Kagayama UR can still be played without skill resistance too, but then you're going to be relying a lot more on the enemy actually doing critical awareness build with their surf and spike and center dump, etc. Okay, whereas if you actually have Kagayama as skill resistance 2, you're able to help that consistency but quite a bit more. And furthermore, Kageyama does able to give a lot of different buffs as skill resistance 2 as well, okay? If you take a look at his base kit, he can already increase quick spike. He can already increase a tiny bit of strength from his skill 3. The only thing he's kind of lacking is going to be buff to attack technique in order to finish off all of the different multipliers. If you don't know what I mean, watch my video on damage formula explained. Basically, the idea that you want a buff across 3 different multiplier stats, and basically the 3 multipliers are going to be quick with power spike, strength, awareness, and also attack technique. And you can see here, Kageyama can already improve on 2 of them just from his base kit. He can also do attack technique, but there's a condition on him doing a critical serve, so I'm going to discount it for now. However, if you do actually have him as skill resistance 2, you can also get this attack technique a lot more consistently. And that's kind of why, even though if you just take a look at any of the numbers, a singular buff that Kageyama was able to provide, it doesn't seem that hard, right? Like 18% here, another 18% here, or only 15% here. Like none of them seem like incredibly high. However, because they're all multiplied together because of the damage formula, if you actually multiply all three increase together, the number is already going to be amplified a lot larger, and that's what makes Kagayama really strong. But once again, in order to get this more consistency of attack technique and also this consistency of all his buff, it's going to be recommended for you to get Kagayama at skill resonance 2, okay? Otherwise, you're going to be relying a lot on the enemy crit mechanics. Okay, he does also have two bond skills. A lot of people have been asking me about this as well. With Hinata, the SSR version, what's going to happen is that he is able to do an unblockable freak quick. Now, this is very strong, it's unblockable, and furthermore, it's the only bone skill in this game which can actually reset the cooldown if you're actually able to score on it, okay? So it's a very strong combo attack, and all of a sudden it's able to elevate basic SSR characters such as Shoyo Hinata all the way to equivalent to UR. I probably wouldn't go as far as an SP character, but at least equivalent of a UR level type of spiking, even though Shoyo Hinata is only an SSR character, okay? And on top of the fact that it's unblockable, you can potentially spam it, depending on whether or not you are able to choose off the right spikes, because you have to win a point to reset the cooldown, etc. It's definitely a very strong bond skill from offensive point of view, okay? Now, the bond skill with the SP version of Shoyo Hinata, personally, I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because it's actually able to also consume your buff stat in order to improve the reflex, which is actually very good for Hinata himself. However, I already talked about, unless you already have your opponent able to do lots of crit, you want to make sure you have a nice stack of your own buffs, or you maybe, let's say you have a skill resistance too, so you can always guarantee a certain number of buff stacks on yourself. Otherwise, you are normally going to be running low on your buff stack, and now if you have to consume even more for your receive, that's actually normally a bad idea for Kagayama UR. Okay. So that's kind of why, if you do really want to play SP Hinata alongside with Kagayama UR, normally it's actually more beneficial if you also play the SP version of Nishinoya. Now, it doesn't actually say it here on Kagayama section, but if you actually go to the SP Nishinoya section, you'll see that when you have the deployment bond with SP Nishinoya, whenever he activates his special move, when Nishinoya activates his special move, Kagayama is also able to get his own buff, okay? So that's kind of why, if you just have the UR version of Kagayama by himself alongside with SP Hinata, but without Nishinoya, it's very likely that you'll be running out of your buff stack very quickly, because now you're just going to be consuming them in far more different ways. However, if you do really want to make the most out of this, higher reflex as well by consuming those buff stack, it's going to be recommended that it's almost always got the case that you have to play SP Hinata, Kagayama, and also SP Nishinoya, all three of them together, okay? Now, let's get to the end of the video, which is going to be whether or not you actually want to summon for him. Now, UR Kagayama, in my opinion, is definitely a lot better than the UR version of Asumumiya. However, we just got a new SP version of Asumumiya as well. Now, whilst the SP version of Asumumiya still have certain quirks where it kind of forces you to not go for a full crit build, etc., because SP version of Asumumiya can still synergize with Shoyo Hinata and also SP version of Hinata and also SP version of Suki to some extent, because their buff, a lot of their awareness is actually done in game, whereas SP version of Asumumiya requires your teammates not to have too high awareness at the start of the rally. So that's kind of why SP version of Asumumiya can still synergize pretty well with SP Hinata and also SP Suki, and on top of that, he obviously also has synergy with SP Osumumiya. So now you can actually build a very strong quick sparking team centered around SP Asumumiya instead of UR Virgin Kageyama. So from that perspective, I actually saw UR Virgin Kageyama has lost a lot of pulling power, and you don't really have to summon for him anymore if you want to go down a quick spiking route. Okay. However, having said that, there's also one other counter argument, which is that the UR version of Kageyama, because he's one of the main protagonists, he has huge number of passive bonds with lots of other characters, including some of the very meta choices such as Komori, Sakusa, Koshiyumi and also Asumiya, and also he also have bonds with Oikawa. He also has bonds with Ushijima, etc. Okay, so for some of you guys who actually have some resources to spare and want to use something for him just for the time being interim to have a good, quick spike in him because you really like him, etc. Even if you just chuck him away in long term, he can still basically improve your team power passively because of those deployment buffs. So not deployment bond, all of those passive character bond with all of the other characters that you'll be playing very regularly as well. Okay, so it's not to say that Kagayama is completely useless just because the SP version of Asumiya is going to be out. Like even if he just is in the box, he can still benefit your team to a tiny bit just because of those passive bonds, those extra stats increase because of the passive bonds. Okay, so that could be another way of looking at it. But obviously that's going to be one very expensive way of improving your team rating. So it's not really going to be recommended unless you really like Kagayama and also want to play him in interim before moving on to, let's say, SP Asumiya in the future for a stronger quick spiking team. Okay, so those are going to be my thoughts on the UR version of Kagayama. Let me know what you guys think and also whether or not you'll be summoning for him.